A night in New York, a city of bright lights and hidden tensions. When an FBI captain walks into a high-class restaurant, a single glance is enough to set off a silent war. In one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, a black man sat quietly, savoring his dinner. Dressed in a crisp suit, his composed presence radiated confidence. But what no one knew, he was the FBI captain. Suddenly, the entrance swung open. A white police officer strode in, his eyes brimming with arrogance. The moment their gazes locked, the air thickened with tension. Silence grew heavier. What happens next? A clash of power, prejudice, and secrets unfolds in this gripping tale. That card, it wasn't just any membership. It was a golden ticket, reserved for those who poured fortunes into the restaurant. The moment the manager saw it, his entire demeanor flipped. "Ah, my apologies, sir. I didn't recognize you. Please, this way." Reluctantly, he led Malcolm to a window seat, but his discomfort still lingered. As Malcolm glanced around, the difference in treatment was undeniable. Waiters floated between tables, engaging warmly with guests. Yet, when they reached his table, their smiles faded. A white couple nearby exchanged whispers, then chuckled. A black guy dining alone? Strange. Malcolm didn't flinch. He had seen this game before. Raising his hand, he waited. 1 minute. 5. No response. Meanwhile, white customers who arrived later were already sipping wine, their tables filled with freshly baked bread. Malcolm let out a knowing chuckle. Same game, different night. "Excuse me," he said at last. A young waitress finally approached, but her reluctance was visible. "What do you need?" Her voice was dry, void of courtesy. "A glass of red wine and the menu." Without a word, she turned and walked away. Malcolm exhaled slowly, reining in his frustration. This was a reality many black people faced daily. At the next table, the white couple kept stealing glances at him. The woman's brows knitted in concern. She tugged at her husband's sleeve. "He looks dangerous. What if he's a gangster?" The husband nodded. "We should do something. We can't just sit here with someone suspicious around." Moments later, they called the manager. "We don't feel safe with this man here." The manager didn't need more. In this place, a white customer's discomfort was reason enough. He nodded, pulled out his phone, and dialed. 911. "I need to report a suspicious black male harassing guests. Possible weapon." Minutes later, sirens wailed outside. A patrol car screeched to a halt. The restaurant doors swung open, and in walked Officer Bradley Ross. Arrogant, unquestioned, untouched by consequences. A man known for his racist tendencies, yet never disciplined. He didn't ask questions, didn't investigate. He stormed straight toward Malcolm's table. "The hell are you doing here?" Ross barked. Silence gripped the restaurant. Malcolm placed his glass down, meeting Ross's glare. "Excuse me." His voice was cool, measured. "I don't understand what you mean." Ross crossed his arms, smirking. "A black guy, alone, in a place like this? Don't screw with me." Malcolm's lips curled into a smirk. He had heard it all before. "So, tell me, officer, have I broken any laws?" Ross scoffed. "I just want to make sure you're not a criminal." Laughter rippled from nearby tables. Malcolm stayed calm, his gaze steady. "Here we go again, just having dinner," Malcolm said coolly. "I can leave if you don't mind." But Ross wasn't done. With a smirk, he pulled out his gun and aimed it straight at Malcolm. The room froze. Gasps filled the air. A few customers screamed. Waiters cowered in fear. "You wanna try your luck?" Ross sneered. "I'll give you 3 seconds to get out." Malcolm didn't move. No fear. No hesitation. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and raised it in front of Ross's face. Ross chuckled. "Gonna call a lawyer? Or maybe your mommy?" You don't stand a chance. But in the next instant, his arrogance shattered. Hello, Director of the New York City Police Department? Malcolm's voice was steady. This is FBI Captain Malcolm Carter. I'm being held at gunpoint by one of your officers without cause at Lawn Rouge restaurant. A wave of shock crashed over the restaurant. The white couple who had called the police sat frozen, wide-eyed. The husband swallowed hard. The wife's hands trembled. Ross's face turned ghostly pale. The gun in his hand wavered. He had spent years tormenting black men, threatening them, humiliating them, without consequence. But tonight he had picked the wrong man. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Is he really FBI? Oh my God, that officer is finished. Waiters who had ignored Malcolm now stood stiff with panic. The restaurant manager wiped the sweat from his brow, realizing the disaster he had just walked into. Ross stammered. You're lying. I don't believe it. You can't be FBI. Malcolm remained unfazed, his phone still to his ear. Okay, then. Stay right there. His voice was calm, too calm. I'm reporting this incident to your superior as we speak. Ross's grip tightened on the gun, but Malcolm didn't flinch. Adjusting his collar, he switched the phone to speaker. A deep, authoritative voice boomed through the speaker. Malcolm, what's going on? Ross's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. The entire department did. It was Donald Reynolds, Director of the New York Police Department. Malcolm's gaze didn't waver. Sir, I am being held at gunpoint by one of your officers, simply because I'm a black man eating alone in a restaurant. Silence. Then Reynolds's voice came back, sharp as a knife. His name. Malcolm didn't answer. He simply stared at Ross. The officer swallowed, his breathing ragged. The white customers who had mocked Malcolm now shrank in their seats. The restaurant manager stumbled backward, his forehead drenched in sweat. Sir, I didn't know, the manager stammered. Please, forgive me. A young waitress, desperate to fix her mistake, rushed over with a glass of water. Malcolm didn't even glance at her. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. Then, the restaurant doors burst open again. Another officer strode in. Lieutenant James Howard, Ross's superior. Howard's gaze swept the scene before landing on Malcolm. He moved swiftly to him, nodding respectfully. Captain Carter, I deeply apologize. We will handle this immediately. Ross's breath hitched. He turned to Howard, pleading. Howard, you can't. A slap cracked through the air. Howard's hand met Ross's face with a force that sent him stumbling. The restaurant gasped. Are you insane? Howard growled. You just pulled a gun on an FBI captain, and you dare speak? Ross's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. But the white customers who had once snickered at Malcolm now looked away. Silent, unwilling to sync with him. His world had collapsed. Malcolm looked down at him, his voice cold. I've seen cops like you, Ross. You think you can step on black men, threaten them, humiliate them, and walk away. Ross's fists clenched, but he said nothing. He knew there was no way out. Howard stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Malcolm's shoulder. Captain Carter, he said, his voice steady. I'll make sure he's suspended. Malcolm nodded slightly, then picked up his glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. His calmness only deepened Ross's humiliation. The disgraced officer sat frozen, his eyes burning with hatred, but deep down, he knew. His career, his power, his life as he knew it, was over. Howard shook his head, disappointment etched into his face. He pulled out his walkie-talkie. Sir, this is Lieutenant Howard. I need an inspection team at Lawn Rouge restaurant immediately. A voice crackled through the intercom. Reason. Howard didn't hesitate. Officer Bradley Ross abused his power, threatened an innocent citizen, and opened fire in a restaurant without just cause. Ross sprang to his feet. Howard, you can't do this to me. Shut up, Ross, Howard snapped, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You pointed a gun at an FBI captain. You humiliated him. In front of an entire restaurant. And you think you'll just walk away?" Ross's mouth opened, but no words came. His face was ghostly pale. I didn't know he was FBI," he stammered. Howard's expression turned ice-cold. "Oh. So if he were just another black man, you'd still curse him, threaten him, and shove a gun in his face?" The words landed like a hammer. Ross had no answer. The restaurant remained deadly silent. Every guest, every waiter, everyone understood the weight of the moment. Malcolm set his glass down, the sound eerily soft yet filled with authority. "Officer Ross," he said, staring directly into the man's panicked eyes. "Today, you were lucky." His voice was low, dangerous. "If I weren't FBI, you would have shot me, wouldn't you?" Ross's lips trembled. He wanted to deny it, but even he wasn't sure. Malcolm took a step forward, standing inches from Ross. His eyes were razor-sharp. "I won't let this go," he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. "Not only are you suspended, but you will also face a federal investigation for abuse of power, racial discrimination, and issuing a death threat." Ross inhaled sharply. The finality in Malcolm's voice left no room for escape. He knew. His life had collapsed. Then, the restaurant doors burst open. A flood of reporters and journalists poured in, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. A female reporter hurried toward Malcolm, urgency in her voice. "Sir, we've received reports that a police officer pointed a gun at an FBI official right here in this restaurant. Can you confirm if that's true?" Malcolm glanced at Howard, then turned to face the crowd of reporters. His posture was firm, his expression unwavering. "I won't say much at this time," he said, his voice commanding, "but I will say this: no one, not even the police, has the right to abuse their power. No one has the right to threaten or oppress someone simply because of the color of their skin." His words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The entire restaurant fell silent. Even the city beyond the glass windows seemed to pause. The reporters stood frozen, absorbing the weight of Malcolm's words. The restaurant, once filled with murmurs and judgmental whispers, was now cloaked in silence. Then, like a tidal wave, chaos erupted, camera flashes, rapid-fire questions, and breaking news updates spreading like wildfire. Ross took an uneasy step back, sweat dripping down his face. He could see it now, his name, his face, his disgrace, plastered across every news channel, every social media platform. His career, his reputation, his entire life, shattered in a single evening. Desperation clawed at his throat as he turned to Howard, eyes pleading. "Howard, please, don't let this reach the media. I have a family. Howard's gaze was cold, unrelenting. "You had a chance to stop, Ross. But you didn't. Now, you'll face the consequences." Ross collapsed into a chair, his head sinking into his hands. For the first time, he felt what so many black people had felt at his hands: powerlessness. Across the room, the restaurant manager hurried toward Malcolm, panic flashing in his eyes. "Sir, please. I deeply apologize for what happened. If you can find it in your heart to forgive us, we—" Malcolm barely spared him a glance before turning away. "No need," he said simply. "Tonight told me everything I need to know about how this place treats its customers." The manager's face drained of color, realizing the repercussions about to crash down on his establishment. Then, the doors swung open once more. This time, it wasn't journalists, it was law enforcement. A team of police inspectors strode in, their presence commanding immediate attention. Howard didn't hesitate. "Arrest him." Two officers stepped forward, gripping Ross's arms as they snapped handcuffs around his wrists. The cameras captured everything. The once arrogant officer was now just another criminal, head bowed, eyes burning with shame. Malcolm said nothing as Ross was escorted out, bundled into the back of a police car. But he knew, this wasn't just an arrest. This was the beginning of something bigger. That night, news of the incident exploded across the internet. White cop points gun at black FBI captain. The truth about racism in the police force exposed once again. Officer Ross could face prison time. Major outlets, CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, all ran the story. Social media caught fire. Within hours, millions of posts and comments flooded in. If he wasn't FBI, this would have been buried. This is why we need police reform. Ross needs to pay for what he did. The backlash wasn't just online. High-ranking officials issued statements condemning the act, demanding a broader investigation into systemic racism within law enforcement. By morning, Ross was formally brought to court. His lawyer scrambled to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, but the surveillance footage and witness testimonies left no room for doubt. The charges were read out loud: threatening behavior with a weapon, abuse of power, racial discrimination, endangering a civilian's life. There was no escape. His fall from grace was complete. Days turned into weeks, and after thorough investigations, the jury finally reached a verdict. Ross was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a ruling that sent shockwaves across the country. The case became a landmark moment, a harsh lesson on police misconduct and the consequences of abusing power. As Malcolm stepped out of the courtroom, a swarm of reporters rushed toward him. A journalist held out a microphone. "Captain Carter, do you have any thoughts on today's verdict?" Malcolm remained calm, his voice steady. "I'm not happy to see a police officer go to jail. But justice has been served today. This sends a crucial message. No one is above the law, not even the police." His words echoed through news broadcasts and social media. Soon after, the city's police chief announced major reforms aimed at rooting out racism within the department. Officers with histories of misconduct were put under scrutiny. Changes were finally happening. But the impact of Ross's actions stretched far beyond his conviction. Mass protests erupted in major cities. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. Thousands took to the streets, holding banners that read, "Police car light justice for all, not just the powerful. Police car light end police abuse. Police car light if the FBI is treated like this. What about ordinary black citizens?" The pressure mounted. The Justice Department stepped in, announcing a broader federal investigation into racial discrimination in law enforcement. Ross wasn't the only one facing consequences. His entire police department was under fire. An internal probe uncovered at least 5 more officers involved in racial profiling, abuse, and misconduct. All were immediately suspended. Then, another bombshell dropped. A former employee of Lawn Rouge took to Twitter, revealing that the restaurant had a long history of racism. "I used to work there. They always treated black customers unfairly, seating them in hidden corners, delaying their service, sometimes even refusing to serve them at all." Her tweet went viral, racking up over 1 million likes and shares. More former customers came forward, sharing similar experiences of discrimination. Under immense backlash, the restaurant announced a temporary closure to retrain staff and revamp service policies. But the damage was done. Would people ever return? Meanwhile, Malcolm's name spread like wildfire. Civil rights organizations invited him to speak at events about racism in law enforcement. Activists hailed him as a hero. But Malcolm turned them all down. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to do my job." Still, deep down, he knew, his actions had sparked change. And what about Ross? Behind bars, he received no special treatment. Many of the black inmates had suffered at the hands of men like him. Their cold stares were unrelenting. Within months, Ross was attacked twice. Fearing for his life, prison officials moved him to isolation. The once powerful officer was now just another inmate living in fear. Yet, the worst part wasn't the violence. It was knowing that the outside world had moved on without him. His career, his reputation, his old life, all gone. Months later, when the dust had settled, Malcolm returned to his FBI duties. But something had changed within him. "I've seen how the system works, and I won't stop fighting to fix it." The road ahead was long. But now, at least, one brick had been laid.